The trade station was busy as always, with ships coming and going, voices in 100 languages filling the air, and the metallic smell of oil and hot engines drifting through the docking bay. Luke, a human engineer, was under his ship with a wrench in one hand and a light clamped between his teeth, working on a stubborn cooling pipe that refused to seal. He had been here for 3 days, repairing the damage from a meteor strike, and was tired of the noise, the crowds, and the strange stares humans often got in alien ports. That was when he noticed her for the first time. She was small, barely up to his chest, with pale blue skin and glowing silver eyes, her hair like strands of soft white light that shimmered whenever she moved. She stood at the far side of the bay, watching him, her head tilted slightly, as if she was curious but also amused by something only she understood. Luke pretended not to notice and kept working. But when he glanced up again, she was gone, Moment later, he heard a light tapping sound behind him, like small fingers drumming against metal. He turned, and there she was, crouched near his toolbox, her sharp little teeth showing as she grinned. Before Luke could say a word, she picked up a small spanner, twirled it in her fingers, and placed it on top of his head like a crown. Then she laughed a quick, soft laugh and darted away. Disappearing between 2 cargo crates, Luke sat there for a second, blinking. Unsure if that had actually just happened, a passing alien merchant chuckled and muttered, "Careful, human. That one likes games," but didn't explain further. Luke called after him, asking what he meant. But the merchant just waved and kept walking. The rest of the day, Luke kept catching glimpses of her. Sometimes she was leaning casually against a wall, sometimes perched high on a railing, swinging her legs. Every time Luke made a move toward her, she would vanish, only to reappear somewhere else. Watching him again, it was like she was testing him, seeing how much of his attention she could pull away from his work. By evening, Luke had finished sealing the cooling pipe. But instead of feeling accomplished, he felt strangely distracted. Something about the way she looked at him, that mix of mischief and challenge, was stuck in his mind as he packed up his tools. A small metallic clink caught his ear. There, on his workbench, lay an unfamiliar object, a thin, hexagonal token with strange markings carved into it. He picked it up, feeling its smooth, cool surface. It wasn't anything from his ship, and he hadn't seen it before. When he looked around, she was standing just a few meters away. Her silver eyes locked on his. She didn't say a word. She just tilted her head again, smiled in that same teasing way, and then slipped into the shadows. Luke turned the token over in his hands, wondering if it was some kind of gift, a warning, or just another part of her game. The station's lights dimmed slightly as night cycle began, casting long shadows across the docking bay. Luke climbed into his ship, but he couldn't shake the thought of her. Who was she? Why was she watching him, and why did she keep teasing him like that? He placed the token in his pocket, telling himself he didn't care, that it was probably just some odd alien custom. But deep down, he knew he was already curious, very curious. That night, as Luke lay in his bunk, the sound of distant engines humming through the walls, he thought he heard soft footsteps outside his ship. He sat up, listening, but after a few seconds, the sound was gone. Still, he couldn't help but feel that somewhere in the shadows, those silver eyes were watching him again, and for reasons he couldn't explain. The idea didn't make him feel afraid. It made him feel interested, like something was about to happen, something he didn't see coming. Luke didn't know yet that this tiny alien girl would soon pull him into a dangerous game, one that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the station lights brightened into artificial daylight, the usual noise of traders, mechanics, and ship crews filling the air. Luke stepped out of his ship with a mug of bitter station coffee, the token from last night still in his pocket. He told himself it had just been a strange encounter, that she was probably just another restless drifter looking for attention. But when he glanced toward the far side of the docking bay, there she was again. The tiny alien girl was sitting cross-legged on top of a crate, swinging her legs back and forth, her silver eyes glinting in the light. When she saw him looking, she gave a small wave, then held up something between her fingers, one of his tools. Luke frowned, patting his belt to find the missing spanner. And sure enough, it was gone, before he could call out. She hopped down and started walking away. Looking over her shoulder with that same mischievous smile, Luke sighed, set down his coffee, and followed. She led him through the maze of cargo stacks, ducking around corners, never moving too fast, just enough to keep him chasing her every time he got close. She would vanish for a few seconds, only to appear again further ahead. It felt less like she was running and more like she was daring him to keep up. Finally, she stopped in an open space between two storage units. Holding out the spanner like a prize, Luke reached for it, but just as his fingers touched it, she pulled it back and grinned. "Too slow, human," she said in broken English, her voice light and playful. Luke crossed his arms, trying not to smile. "You're going to give that back, or am I going to have to take it?" She tilted her head, pretending to think, then shook it slowly. "No. You take it." She tossed the spanner into the air, and before Luke could react, she darted forward, slipped it into his tool belt, and stepped back. The movement was so quick and smooth that Luke almost laughed. "All right," he said. "You win." Her smile widened, but her eyes flickered with something else interest. Maybe or approval. Without another word, she reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a tiny cube. She pressed it into his palm, her fingers brushing his for just a moment, then turned and walked away without looking back. Luke examined the cube. It was covered in faint glowing lines, the kind of tech far beyond anything humans used. It hummed softly in his hand, like it was alive. He wanted to call after her, ask what it was, but she was already gone, lost. In the crowd, that evening, as Luke worked on his ship again, she appeared without warning, dropping down from the overhead walkway. She didn't say anything, just crouched beside him and started handing him the right tools without him asking. It was strange. She seemed to know exactly what he needed, when he needed it. "Do you even know what I'm fixing?" Luke asked. She shook her head with a teasing smile. "No." "But human hands too slow alone." Luke chuckled, despite himself. "You really like calling me slow, don't you?" She nodded, clearly pleased. For the next hour, she stayed near him, sometimes working, sometimes poking at random parts of the ship at one point. She reached into her pouch and showed him the metallic token she had left him yesterday, then held it next to the glowing cube. Luke noticed that when placed side by side, the markings aligned into a single pattern. Before he could ask what it meant, she snatched them both back and slipped them away, her expression unreadable. Just as Luke was about to press for answers, a loud announcement echoed through the docking bay. A security sweep was about to begin. The girl's smile faded slightly, and she glanced toward the main entrance without another word. She tapped Luke on the shoulder and pointed toward a side passage. Then she was gone again, disappearing into the shadows like she had never been there. Luke stood there, confused, holding the spanner she had returned to him earlier. Something about her behavior didn't feel like just playful teasing anymore. It felt like she was testing him, preparing him for something he didn't yet understand. That night, as Luke lay in his bunk, the cube and token in his pocket, he thought about the way her eyes had changed during the announcement. She was hiding something, maybe from the station guards, maybe from someone far worse. And without realizing it, Luke found himself deciding that the next time she appeared, he wouldn't just let her vanish again. He was going to follow, no matter where she led, because this wasn't just a game anymore. It was the start of something bigger, and he could feel it. The station's market level was always noisy. crowded, and full of smells from 100 alien kitchens. Luke moved through the crowd with his hands in his pockets, the cube and token pressing against his palm. He wasn't shopping, he was looking, hoping to see the tiny alien girl again. 2 days had passed since their last meeting, and he was starting to wonder if she had left the station. Then, as he passed a row of food stalls, he slowed down. 2 tall insectoid aliens were speaking in low voices, their antennae twitching as they glanced around. Luke didn't know their language well, but he caught a few words, enough to make him stop and listen. One word stood out clearly: Starrogue. Followed by another he understood all too well: bounty. Luke shifted closer, pretending to browse a rack of dried alien fruit. The insectoids continued talking, their voices sharp and urgent. They spoke about a pet who had stolen something from the Starrogue, a feared warlord known for burning entire colonies to dust. The bounty wasn't just for her capture, but for her alive, which meant she had something the warlord wanted. One of them even laughed and said, "She's tiny, easy to catch. Unless she hides with a fool." Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't need anyone to draw him a picture. They were talking about her. And if the Starrogue's bounty hunters were already here, she was running out of time. When the insectoids moved away, Luke slipped into a side corridor, his mind racing. He didn't know why he cared, but he couldn't just let her be hunted down. As he turned the corner toward the docking level, a shadow moved beside him. Slow human, came the familiar voice. Luke stopped in his tracks. She was leaning casually against the wall, her silver eyes watching him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You've been hiding," Luke said. Trying to keep his tone calm, she tilted her head. "No hiding." Watching, Luke took a step closer, lowering his voice. "There's a bounty on you." Her smile faded, the teasing glint in her eyes replaced by something colder. "I know," she said softly. "Then tell me," Luke pressed. "What did you take from the Starrogue?" She hesitated, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. Then she reached into her pouch and pulled out the cube, holding it up so it caught the dim station light. "This," she said, "has truth inside. Truth that makes Warlord weak." Luke frowned. "Truth?" She nodded. "Records, maps, names. Proof of things he hides." Before Luke could ask more, a heavy metallic thud echoed down the corridor. It was the sound of armored boots, more than one pair, approaching fast. The alien girl's silver eyes narrowed. "Too late," she whispered, without thinking. Luke grabbed her hand. "Come on," he said, pulling her toward the maintenance tunnels. They ran through the narrow passageways, the sound of pursuit growing louder. Luke had no idea where he was going, but she seemed to know every shortcut, ducking through small openings and weaving between pipes. Finally, they stopped in a cramped service room lit only by the glow of old wiring. Both of them were breathing hard. Luke looked at her, his voice steady but urgent. "If you keep running alone, they'll catch you." Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Maybe. But human will be in trouble too." "I'm already in trouble," Luke said. "So we might as well be in it together." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if weighing his words. Then she nodded slowly. Outside, the sound of boots passed by then faded. Luke leaned against the wall, trying to think of the next step. She sat on a crate, watching him, then said quietly, "If I fall into their hands, they won't just kill me." Luke's stomach turned. "Then we won't let that happen." Something in his voice made her blink, as if she didn't expect such certainty. She reached into her pouch again, and this time handed him both the cube and the token. "You keep," she said. "If they find me, you run." Luke closed his fingers around them, feeling the weight of more than just metal. He shook his head. "No. I'm not running without you." For the first time since he'd met her, she didn't have a teasing reply. They sat in silence for a moment. The faint hum of the station's systems filling the air. Luke didn't know how yet, but he knew. One thing, if the Star Rogue wanted her, he'd have to go through him first. And as far as Luke was concerned, that wasn't going to happen. The air in the service room was heavy. The faint smell of burned wiring clinging to the walls. Luke's mind was already working on possible escape routes, but the girl's silver eyes were fixed on the door. She could hear something he couldn't. A faint metallic click repeated in steady rhythm. "Hunters," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost a breath. Luke tightened his grip on the cube and token, sliding them into the hidden pocket of his jacket. He wasn't about to let them fall into enemy hands. The door control panel flickered, then sparked. She didn't wait. She grabbed Luke's arm and yanked him toward a narrow vent in the far corner. "Move," she said, urgency breaking through her usual playful tone. Luke dropped to his knees and crawled inside the metal cold under his palms. Behind them, the service room door hissed open, heavy boots stepping onto the floor. The vent was dark and cramped, every sound echoing. Luke could hear the muffled voices of the hunters, speaking in a harsh, guttural language. One voice came closer, and then there was a loud metallic clang against the vent wall. The girl pushed Luke forward. "Faster," she hissed. They emerged into a dim maintenance corridor, the light strips on the walls flickering weakly. Luke started toward the docking level, but she grabbed his wrist and shook her head. "Too many there," she said. "We take shadow path, shadow path." Luke asked, but she didn't answer. She darted into a narrow passage, barely wide enough for one person, forcing him to follow. The sound of boots echoed behind them again. They'd been spotted. The corridor sloped downward, the air growing colder and damper. Luke realized they were heading toward the lower gravity sectors, an area most station visitors avoided. The floor grates rattled under their feet as they moved. Suddenly, she stopped, pressing her back against the wall. Two armored hunters appeared ahead, their glowing visors scanning the passage. Luke's heart pounded. She reached for the small knife at her hip, but Luke shook his head and pointed upward. A web of thick pipes ran across the ceiling, leading over the hunters' heads. Understanding, she gave him a quick nod. Luke boosted her up, first her small frame moving quickly and silently. He followed, the metal groaning under his weight. They crawled over the hunters, the sound of their own breathing deafening in the tight space. One of the hunters suddenly tilted his head, as if sensing something. Luke froze, holding his breath. After a tense moment, they moved on. Once clear, they dropped back to the floor and kept running. The passage opened into a massive chamber filled with old storage crates stacked like a maze. "This way," she said, weaving through the stacks with practiced speed. Luke struggled to keep up. She was fast, even when not teasing. Suddenly, the chamber doors slammed shut behind them, a deep warning alarm echoing through the walls. "They lock it," she said grimly. Luke looked around. The only way out now was up, toward a service catwalk high above. "Can you climb that?" he asked. She smirked, despite the danger. "I can. Can you?" He didn't bother answering. He just started climbing. The metal rungs were cold and slick, but adrenaline pushed him upward. She was already halfway up when the hunters entered. From a side hatch, weapons ready, a pulse shot blasted the wall near Luke, showering him with sparks. He climbed faster, reaching the catwalk just as another shot narrowly missed. The girl pulled him forward, leading him toward a maintenance lift at the far end. They jumped inside, slamming the controls, and the lift lurched upward through the open sides. Luke could see the hunters trying to follow, but they were too late. As the lift rose into the upper decks, the girl finally let out a slow breath. "You run better than I thought," she said, a small smile breaking through her serious expression. Luke smirked back. "Guess I'm not so slow after all." Her smile lingered for a second, but then her gaze turned distant. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "They will follow until one of us falls." Luke didn't say anything. He knew she was right, but in that moment, he also knew something else. He wasn't about to let that one be her. The lift doors opened into the dim glow of the upper maintenance bays. Somewhere beyond them lay safety, or at least a better chance to fight back, and Luke was ready to take it no matter what came next. The maintenance lift rattled to a stop, its doors opening into a dim, dusty deck far from the main station traffic. Luke stepped out first, scanning the area. This part of the station smelled of rust and old oil, the walls stained with years of neglect. It was the kind of place where no one looked too closely at strangers, perfect for hiding. The alien girl followed, her eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, as if expecting danger at every turn. "This way," Luke said quietly, leading her toward his ship, which was docked in a forgotten corner of the upper bays. When they reached the ramp, she paused, her gaze lingering on the human ship's hull. "You trust me inside?" she asked, her tone not mocking this time, but genuinely curious. Luke gave a small shrug. "I figure you've had plenty of chances to stab me if you wanted to." That earned him the faintest smirk before she stepped inside. The interior smelled faintly of metal and machine oil. With a low hum from the ship's systems, Luke motioned toward the small side cabin. "You can stay in there for now, but keep the door shut." She didn't argue, slipping inside without a word. Luke sat at the main console, his mind racing. He had no idea how long they could hide here before the hunters swept the upper decks. The cube and token were still in his jacket, their presence like a weight against his chest. A few minutes later, she emerged from the cabin, holding a blanket she had found. Without asking, she draped it over his shoulders. "Cold," she said simply. Luke blinked, a little caught off guard. "Thanks." She perched on the edge of the co-pilot's chair, watching him with her usual calm. "You run fast," she said after a pause. "Not as slow as I thought." Luke chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." She tilted her head. "You help me." "Why?" He didn't answer right away, instead checking the scanner to make sure no one was tracking the ship. Finally, he said, "Because you're in trouble. And I know what it's like when no one else will stand with you." Her silver eyes studied him for a moment longer before she looked away. The hours passed slowly, the hum of the ship and the distant vibrations of the station creating a strange, tense calm. At one point, she started poking at the food packets in his storage, sniffing each one before tossing it back. Luke raised an eyebrow, looking for something in particular. She grinned faintly. "Something not disgusting?" He laughed, shaking his head, and handed her a sealed pack of human rations. She sniffed it, made a face, and still ate it, muttering something in her own language that sounded like a complaint. As night cycle began, the docking bay outside fell quiet. Luke dimmed the ship's lights and moved to the sleeping area. "You should rest," he said. "We might have to move fast tomorrow." She didn't move toward the cabin, instead curling up in the corner of the main room with her blanket, closer to door. She explained, "If danger comes, I run first." Luke nodded, letting her be. He lay back in his bunk, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he thought of the hunters' glowing visors and the way she had looked when she said they would follow until one of them fell. In the middle of the night cycle, Luke woke to a faint sound, soft footsteps on the deck. He opened his eyes to see her standing by the cockpit, staring out at the station lights through the viewport. "You can't sleep either?" he asked quietly. She turned, her expression unreadable to many years running. "Sleep is hard." Luke sat up. "You could stay here, until it's safe." She shook her head slowly. "Safe is not real for me for a moment." They just looked at each other, the low light casting faint shadows across her face. Then she smiled, but it was smaller, softer than usual. "You strange human," she said, "but maybe." "Good strange." She returned to her corner, pulling the blanket around her. Luke lay back down, the faint hum of the ship filling the silence. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't just about hiding anymore. It was about keeping a promise. He hadn't spoken out loud yet. The promise that as long as she stayed close, she wouldn't be facing the danger alone. The station's night cycle had settled in. The upper docking bays nearly silent, only the hum of distant machinery breaking the stillness. Luke sat in the cockpit, staring at the scanner, watching for any hint of movement outside. So far, nothing. But he knew better than to feel safe. The alien girl was curled up in her corner, her blanket pulled over her small frame, silver eyes half closed, but still alert. She wasn't really asleep. He could tell by the way her fingers twitched every time the ship made a faint noise. Then the lights flickered, just for a second. Luke sat up straighter, checking the controls. "That wasn't me," he said. Quietly, she opened her eyes fully, listening, her ears twitching slightly as if catching something he couldn't. "Power shift," she murmured. "Station grid." Changing, before Luke could ask what she meant, the lights went out completely, plunging the ship into darkness. The only illumination came from the faint glow of her silver eyes. Luke's pulse quickened. Could be a system's fault. "Someone cutting power to flush us out." She stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "If they come, stay close to me." Luke gave a faint, tense smile. I was about to say the same thing. The station's emergency lights kicked in outside, casting a dim red glow through the viewport. Shadows stretched across the floor, shifting with every flicker of the failing lights. Luke reached for the small pulse pistol he kept in the cockpit. She shook her head, placing her hand over his. "Noise will call more hunters. We hide first." They moved toward the sleeping area. Keeping low, the ship suddenly shuddered. A dull thump echoing from somewhere near the hull. Luke's breath caught. "They're here," without hesitation. She pulled him toward the small sleeping cabin, pushing him inside before slipping in after him. The space was cramped, barely enough for one person, and now they were pressed shoulder to shoulder. Her warmth was immediate in the cold air, her breathing slow and steady despite the danger. Luke could feel her hand rest lightly on his arm, not in fear, but as if anchoring him. Minutes passed. The sounds outside growing louder, boots on metal, muffled voices in a language Luke didn't understand. She leaned in, her lips near his ear, whispering so softly it was barely sound. "If they find us, we run together." Luke nodded once, their faces close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of her hair, even in the darkness. For a while, they stayed like that, listening, waiting. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter, different. "When I was small, my world was taken. The warlord burned the skies." Luke stayed silent, letting her continue. "My family was gone before I could understand why. I learned to run, to hide, to steal, to live, and to tease so others see me as trouble, not as prey." Her tone held no self-pity, just truth. Luke's chest tightened. "You don't have to run alone anymore," he said softly. She studied him for a moment, her silver eyes searching his face. "Humans," she murmured, "always making promises they cannot keep." "I can keep this one," Luke replied, his voice steady. Something in her gaze softened then, and for the first time since they met, she leaned against him fully. The space was so small they could feel each heartbeat, each slow breath outside. The sounds began to fade. Either the hunters had moved on or were searching another part of the station. Still, neither of them moved in that quiet darkness. The danger outside felt distant for a moment, replaced by something unspoken, but certain. An understanding had formed between them, one that didn't need words. When the emergency lights flickered again, she finally pulled back slightly, her usual teasing smirk returning. Though softer this time, human is warm, she said simply. Luke chuckled quietly. Don't get used to it. She tilted her head, too late. They stayed in the cabin until the ship's systems hummed back to life. The main lights returning, Luke checked the scanners again. No immediate threats. She stood at the doorway, glancing back at him before stepping out. Tomorrow. We leave this place. Luke nodded. Tomorrow? That night. For the first time since meeting her, Luke fell asleep without wondering if she would vanish before morning, and she, for the first time in years, slept without her hand on a weapon. The artificial dawn on the station was slow, the lights brightening from deep red to pale gold. Luke was already awake. Sitting at the cockpit with his eyes on the scanner, the alien girl sat beside him, legs pulled up to her chest, her gaze fixed on the viewport. Neither spoke for a long time, the quiet between them holding more than words could. When the scanner beeped softly, Luke leaned forward. His voice low. They're sweeping this level now. She didn't flinch. Then, we go. Luke had already modified the ship's engines for a fast launch. It would be risky, loud, and draw attention, but it was their only chance. He stood and started running through the pre-flight checks while she moved around the cabin with quick, efficient motions, securing loose gear and checking the seals. Through the viewport, movement caught Luke's eye, a squad of armored hunters entering the far end of the bay. Their weapons ready, they're here, he said, his pulse quickening. She glanced out, then looked back at him with a faint smile. Let's see if slow human can fly fast, Luke smirked. Buckle in. He hit the engine start sequence, the ship's systems roaring to life, the vibrations running through the deck plates. The hunters reacted instantly, breaking into a run, their visors glowing in the dim light. The girl slid into the co-pilot's chair, her fingers flying over controls Luke didn't even recognize. What are you doing? He asked over the rising engine noise, making them blind. She replied. Tapping a final sequence, outside, a row of docking lights flickered violently, plunging half the bay into shadow. Luke didn't waste time asking how he throttled the engines and disengaged the clamps. The ship lurched forward, the docking bay alarms screaming to life. Pulse fire slammed into the shields, the impact shaking the cockpit. Luke gritted his teeth, guiding the ship through the narrowing gap. Between cargo stacks, the girl's voice was calm, steady. Left. Now, up. Sharp right. He followed her directions without hesitation, trusting her knowledge of the station's layout. A final blast from the rear cannons of the Hunter's gunship lit up the bay, narrowly missing them as Luke pulled hard into open space. The stars filled the viewport, cold and endless. But there was no time to breathe. The Hunter's ship was already in pursuit, their engines flaring bright. Luke pushed the throttle to maximum, the ship straining under the sudden acceleration. Too slow, she teased, though her hands moved quickly over the weapons console. Bringing the rear guns online, Luke grinned despite the danger. Then make me faster. She tapped into the auxiliary power, redirecting everything to the engines. The lights in the cabin dimming as the ship surged ahead. The Hunter ship fired. Again, a blast grazing the starboard wing, alarms flaring in the cockpit. Luke swung the ship into a roll, diving toward the cover of a dense asteroid field ahead. They won't follow in there, she said, her voice certain. Why not? Luke asked. Because they're not crazy, she replied. But you are. Luke smiled tightly. Guess that's our advantage. They plunged into the asteroid field. Massive rocks spinning slowly in the darkness, their surfaces lit by the glow of distant stars. Luke weaved through the narrow gaps, each turn barely avoiding a collision. The girl's eyes stayed sharp, calling out incoming debris before it appeared on the scanner. The Hunter ship slowed, their pursuit faltering. At the edge of the field, they're breaking off, Luke said, his breath heavy. For now, she warned. They will wait for us to come out. Luke glanced at her. Then we don't come out where they expect. She smiled faintly, understanding, and began plotting a course through the asteroid field toward a hidden exit point. Minutes later, they emerged far from the hunters. The empty black of space stretching ahead. Luke eased the throttle back, the ship gliding silently now. The girl leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. You fly well. For a human, Luke chuckled. And you're not a bad co-pilot. For someone who keeps calling me slow. She tilted her head, silver eyes glinting. If I stop calling you slow, you might stop trying to prove me wrong. Luke smirked. Guess I'll just have to keep proving it anyway. The quiet settled again, but this time it was a comfortable silence. The danger was still out there, the star rogue still hunting. But for now, they were free. She turned toward him, her tone softer than before. Where will you go now? Luke glanced at the endless stars ahead, wherever you need to be, for the first time. Her teasing smile faded into something warmer, something almost shy. Then she said quietly, I stay. Luke didn't answer with words. He just pushed the throttle forward, the stars stretching into streaks as they jumped into hyperspace and somewhere deep inside. Both of them knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning.